We often make tables when displaying data. The table shown here is a table used in a previous lesson that shows Chicago high and low daily temperatures for February of 2014. For many sets of data, a table such as this is all that's needed to display and analyze data. But sometimes we like to display data in other ways. We're going to look at two other ways in this lesson. The first way is a line graph. And one way is to get out your ruler and make a line, and then take a look at your data. In this case, we know that there's 28 days in February. So we use our ruler to mark off enough tick marks so that we can write in 28. Then we put the ruler up there for the vertical axis, which would be the temperatures. And then we start to count 1 to 28. But I'm going to stop here because while you could do it this way, a way that I prefer is to get some pre-printed graph paper, which I have here. Make sure that I have enough graph paper to display the data. And I do. There's my days, February 1st through 28th, down the bottom, or the horizontal axis. And then for the temperatures, I'm going to count by 2 and label by 4s, because I know the highest temperature was 51 degrees, and the lowest temperature, I believe, was 4 below zero. So I made sure that I had enough graph paper, so if I counted by 2s, I could get all of that data displayed. And then I'm going to label my axes. So the horizontal axis is labeled date in February for 2014. The vertical axis is Fahrenheit temperatures. And then you'll notice I wrote high in blue with a blue dot and low in orange with an orange dot, and that's called the legend, because in fact this is going to be a double line graph. But first we'll do a single line graph for the high temperatures. And you have to have the data chart in front of you, which I do. You can't see it on the screen, but if you're making the graph, you need the data, and we know that on February 1st, the high temperature was 32 degrees, so we make a dot. And then on February 2nd, the high temperature was 23 degrees, so we make another dot. And then on the 3rd, it was 22 degrees, and so on, day by day. And then I've done several in a row, and then I finished up the month, and there are all the dots. But you know, I said this was a line graph. So now to show trends, increasing and decreasing temperatures, we connect the dots day by day. So you need to be careful so you get the days in consecutive order. I start connecting, and then a little more, and I finish. And there's a single line graph that shows the daily high temperatures for February in Chicago. Now we're going to make this a double line graph by doing the same thing with the low temperatures. There's the first group through February 7th, and there's the rest through February 28th, and now I very carefully connect those dots, and there we have it. Each day, of course, the high temperature is going to be higher on the graph than the low temperature, and while some of the low temperatures are higher than some of the high temperatures, the orange graph for each day is lower than the blue graph. It shows warming trends and cooling trends. It's a nice way to display the data for high and low temperatures. You can also use some software, some apps, some graphing calculators. Here's an example. It's the same graph. It's an application called Numbers. And I typed in the data. I had to know what to do, and I got a similar graph. And let's do them side by side. I feel pretty good. The one I made by hand looks pretty similar to the one made automatically in the application called Numbers. Now we're going to display the data in another way called a histogram. You start with a grid, something like this. You need to select the grid so that it'll handle your data. And I'm going to do the low temperatures first. So I start with a title, Chicago Daily Low Temperatures for February 2014. And you can make just about any set of intervals that you would like, but you don't want to make too few or too many intervals. So I've made my intervals in tens. My lowest interval is temperatures below zero. Then from 0 to 9 degrees, from 10 to 19 degrees, from 20 to 29 degrees, from 30 to 39 degrees, from 40 to 49 degrees, and 50 degrees and above. And then I have on the vertical axis the number of days. So this is a lot different than the line graph. What we're going to do is make a bar graph that shows the number of days that had temperatures in each one of these intervals. And again, I had to pick this grid so that it would fit. And I noticed that the highest interval for low temperatures had 11 in it. So I made sure that my graph could handle a bar that needs to go up to 11. So I label my vertical axis from 1 to 11, and then I start filling in the bars. I looked, and there were 4 days that had below 0 temperatures as the low temperature for the day. There were 11 days with temperatures from 0 to 9, and that's my largest interval, single-digit low temperatures. And then I counted 6 days with low temperatures from 10 to 19, 5 days with low temperatures from 20 to 29, 2 days with low temperatures in the 30s, and there were no days with low temperatures 40 or above. I only included those intervals because I'm going to compare this histogram with my histogram for high temperatures in just a moment. Now I'm going to make a separate histogram for the daily high temperatures. There's my grid. There's my title. But I've looked at the interval and I've done some counting, and I've decided that my grid will fit better if I make a horizontal histogram here. So now I'm going to write in my number of days, so I've switched the horizontal with the vertical axis between my two histograms. And I did some counting in advance, and I discovered that the high temperature was in the 20s, 15 different days in February, so I had to make sure that my grid goes out to 15, and it does. And then I label the horizontal axis number of days. And now I can start filling in the bars. There was 1 day above 50 degrees, 2 days in the 40s, 5 days with high temperatures in the 30s, and there's our 15 days where the high temperature was in the 20s, 5 days the high temperature was in the teens, and there were no days below that, so I need no more bars, but I included those intervals once again because eventually I'm going to compare the daily high and the daily low temperatures. And I'm going to do that with what's known as a double histogram. And I need a grid something like this. And I've set it up because I know the low temperatures have a longest interval of 11 and the high temperatures have the longest interval of 15. They're both going to be horizontal and they're going to be side by side. There's my title. I'm going to put the lows on the left and the highs on the right. I'm going to do the number of days along the bottom and fill those in. 1 to 11 on the lows, 1 to 15 on the highs. And then I'm going to write in the intervals that I've selected. Once again, the same intervals I've already used by 10 degrees each time. And I'll start with the highs. There was 1 day above 50, 2 days 40 to 49, 5 days 30 to 39, 15 days with high temperatures in the 20s, and 5 days with high temperatures in the teens. And that covers all of the high temperature days for February. So now I'm going to do the low temperatures. And there were no low temperatures above 40 degrees, so there were 2 days in the 30s, 5 days in the 20s, 6 days in the teens, 11 days with single-digit low temperatures, and 4 days where the low temperature was below 0. And now we have a double histogram for daily high and low temperatures for February 2014. I'm not sure if the histogram is the best way to display this data, but I use this data as an example. Histograms are often used for perhaps grade distribution, number of A's, B's, C's, D's, and occasionally an F. And perhaps if a double histogram is used, it might show male students and female students. But a histogram can be made for just about any set of data. It's up to you whether you think it's necessary for the data you're looking at. Tables, line graphs, and histograms are often used to represent data.